Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded shopping mall, her shoulders slightly hunched as she tried to make herself invisible. The intricate tattoo on her left forearm caught the attention of passers-by, just as it always did. Some stared openly, others whispered to their companions, and a few shook their heads in obvious disapproval. She had grown accustomed to these reactions over the past 3 years, but they still stung every time. The tattoo was beautiful and meaningful to her, though most people couldn't see past their own assumptions. It depicted a military scene with fallen soldiers, an American flag, and dates that held deep significance. The artwork was detailed and professionally done, but to many onlookers, it simply represented another young woman making poor life choices. As Sarah approached the food court, she heard the familiar sound of judgment being passed. 2 middle-aged women sat at a nearby table, their voices just loud enough for her to hear. "Look at that girl's arm," one of them said, gesturing discreetly in Sarah's direction. "What kind of person gets something like that permanently marked on their body?" Her companion nodded in agreement. "It's such a shame. She seems like a nice enough girl. But that tattoo makes her look so unprofessional. I would never hire someone who looks like that." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She wanted to turn around and explain the story behind her tattoo, to make them understand that it wasn't just random artwork or a rebellious statement. But she had learned from experience that most people weren't interested in hearing explanations. They had already made up their minds based on appearances alone. She found an empty table in a corner of the food court and sat down with her coffee, trying to ignore the continued stares. The tattoo told a story that was deeply personal to her, one that connected her to some of the most important people in her life. But in a society that often judged books by their covers, few people bothered to ask about the story behind the ink. The criticism wasn't limited to strangers in public places. Sarah had faced similar reactions in job interviews, at family gatherings, and even from some of her friends. Her own mother had cried when she first saw the tattoo, begging her to consider laser removal. Her father had been more understanding, but even he worried about how it might affect her future opportunities. "You're such a smart girl, Sarah," her mother had said through tears. "Why would you do something that might hold you back in life? People are going to judge you before they even get to know you." Sarah understood her mother's concerns, but the tattoo meant more to her than any potential career setback or social disapproval. It was a tribute, a memorial, and a promise all rolled into one piece of art. Every line and every detail had been carefully chosen to honor people who deserved to be remembered and respected. As she sat in the food court, Sarah's mind drifted back to the day she had decided to get the tattoo. She had been sitting in a hospital waiting room, holding a letter that had changed her life forever. The decision hadn't been made lightly or impulsively. She had thought about it for months, researching artists and designing the piece with careful consideration for every element. The tattoo artist had been surprised by her detailed specifications and the emotional weight behind the design. Most of his clients came in with flash art from the walls or simple designs they had found online. Sarah arrived with a folder full of photographs, documents, and sketches that told a complete story. "This is really meaningful to you, isn't it?" the artist had asked as he worked on the preliminary sketches. Sarah had nodded, unable to trust her voice to remain steady. "It's the most important thing I've ever done." The actual tattooing process had taken several sessions over the course of 2 months. Each visit brought the design closer to completion, and with it, a sense of peace that Sarah hadn't felt in a long time. The physical pain of the needle was nothing compared to the emotional pain that had led her to this decision. Now, sitting in the mall food court, while people continued to judge her appearance, Sarah traced the edges of the tattoo with her finger. She could feel the slightly raised skin where the ink had been embedded, and she remembered every moment of the process. The pain, the tears, the sense of purpose that had driven her to see it through to completion. A group of teenagers walked by, and one of them pointed at her arm while making a comment to his friends. They all laughed, and Sarah felt the familiar sting of embarrassment. She pulled her sleeve down to cover the tattoo, a defensive gesture she had perfected over the years. Sometimes Sarah wondered if her mother had been right. Maybe it would have been better to find a different way to honor the memory and meaning behind the tattoo. Maybe a private memorial or a piece of jewelry would have been more appropriate. But deep down, she knew that nothing else would have felt as permanent or as personal as carrying the tribute on her own skin. The tattoo had cost her job opportunities, relationships, and social acceptance in many circles. Some people saw it and immediately categorized her as irresponsible, rebellious, or unprofessional. They made assumptions about her character, her intelligence, and her values based solely on the artwork visible on her arm. But Sarah had never regretted her decision, even in the face of constant criticism. The tattoo represented something that transcended social expectations and professional norms. It was a visible reminder of sacrifice, love, and loss that she carried with her everywhere she went. As she finished her coffee and prepared to continue her shopping trip, Sarah took a deep breath and rolled up her sleeve again. She had learned to live with the stares and whispers, understanding that most people would never take the time to learn the real story behind her tattoo. Their judgment said more about them than it did about her, and she had made peace with that reality. The meaningful artwork on her arm would continue to draw attention and criticism, but Sarah knew that someday someone would understand its true significance. Until then, she would carry her story with dignity, regardless of what others thought about her choice to make it visible to the world. 3 months after the mall incident, Sarah found herself starting a new job at a local nonprofit organization that helped veterans transition back to civilian life. The interview process had been different from others she had experienced. When the director, Mrs. Campbell, noticed her tattoo, she had asked about it with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "That's quite an impressive piece of artwork," Mrs. Campbell had said during the interview. "Is there a story behind it?" Sarah had hesitated, unsure whether sharing the truth would help or hurt her chances of getting the job. But something in Mrs. Campbell's tone suggested sincere interest rather than disapproval. "It's a memorial," Sarah had said simply, "for someone very important to me." Mrs. Campbell had nodded respectfully and moved on to other interview questions, but Sarah could tell that her answer had been noted and appreciated rather than dismissed. Now, 2 weeks into her new position, Sarah was beginning to feel comfortable in her work environment. The nonprofit's mission resonated deeply with her, and she found purpose in helping veterans navigate the challenges of returning to civilian life. Many of the clients had their own visible reminders of their service, including scars, prosthetics, and tattoos that told stories of their own. One afternoon, Sarah was working with a young veteran named Marcus, who had recently returned from deployment overseas. He was struggling with paperwork related to his benefits and seemed frustrated with the bureaucratic processes he was encountering. "I just don't understand why everything has to be so complicated," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. "I served my country for 4 years, and now I feel like I'm fighting a different kind of war just to get the help I was promised." Sarah looked up from the forms they were reviewing together and saw Marcus staring at her tattoo. Unlike the judgmental stare she was used to receiving, his expression showed recognition and respect. "That's military, isn't it?" Marcus asked, pointing to her forearm. "The tattoo, those are military dates and insignia." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of pride and vulnerability. "Yes, it is." Marcus studied the details more carefully and his expression grew solemn. "Someone close to you served?" "My brother," Sarah said quietly. "He was killed in action 3 years ago." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that Marcus immediately understood. His own eyes grew misty as he processed what she had shared. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said with the sincerity that only comes from someone who has experienced similar pain. "What branch?" "Marines," Sarah replied. "He was on his second deployment when it happened." Marcus nodded slowly, and Sarah could see that he was connecting dots in his mind. The detailed military imagery in her tattoo, the specific dates, the careful attention to accurate insignia, it all made sense to someone who understood military culture and the significance of such symbols. "That's why you work here," Marcus said. It wasn't a question but a statement of understanding. Sarah smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Partly, yes. I wanted to do something that would honor his memory while helping other veterans. He always talked about how hard it was for some of his friends to adjust when they came home." For the remainder of their session, Marcus's demeanor changed completely. He was more engaged, more trusting, and more willing to share his own struggles with the transition process. Sarah realized that her tattoo, which had been a source of judgment and criticism from so many people, had actually created a bridge of understanding with someone who truly needed her help. Word spread quietly among the veteran clients about Sarah's personal connection to their community. She never advertised the story behind her tattoo, but when veterans noticed it and asked respectful questions, she shared appropriately. Each conversation deepened her relationships with the people she was trying to help and reinforced her sense of purpose in the work. However, not everyone in Sarah's life understood or appreciated this new development. During a family dinner one Sunday, her aunt made a comment that reflected the ongoing tension around her decision to get the tattoo. "I still think you should consider having that removed, Sarah," her aunt said while they were clearing dishes. "Now that you have a professional job, it might be time to think about your image." Sarah's mother quickly tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The comment stung because it showed how little her extended family understood about the meaningful work she was doing and the positive impact her tattoo was having in her professional life. "Actually," Sarah said calmly, "my tattoo has been an asset in my work. It helps me connect with the veterans I'm trying to help because they understand what it represents." Her aunt looked skeptical. "But what about when you want to advance in your career? What about when you want to work somewhere more traditional?" Sarah felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest. Even when she had evidence that her tattoo was helping, rather than hurting her professionally, some people remained convinced that visible tattoos were inherently problematic. "I'm exactly where I want to be," Sarah replied, "and I'm doing work that matters to me. The tattoo isn't holding me back. It's helping me do my job better." Later that evening, Sarah's father pulled her aside for a private conversation. He had been quietly supportive of her decision to get the tattoo, but she knew he still worried about the potential consequences. "I'm proud of the work you're doing," he said, "and I can see how much it means to you. Your brother would be proud too." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Her father's approval meant more to her than all the criticism from extended family members and strangers combined. "I miss him every day," Sarah said, "but working with these veterans makes me feel like I'm continuing something he started. Like I'm honoring his service in a way that actually makes a difference." Her father hugged her tightly. "You are making a difference, and anyone who can't see that isn't paying attention." As Sarah drove home that night, she reflected on how her life had changed since getting the tattoo. Yes, she had faced criticism and judgment from people who didn't understand its significance, but she had also found her calling, connected with people who shared her values, and discovered a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. The tattoo continued to serve as a conversation starter with veterans who recognized its military significance. Each positive interaction reinforced Sarah's belief that she had made the right choice, even when others couldn't see past their own preconceptions about body art and professional appearance. 6 months into her job at the Veterans Nonprofit, Sarah had established herself as one of the most effective advocates in the organization. Her genuine understanding of military culture, combined with her personal connection to the veteran community, made her invaluable in helping clients navigate complex systems and find the resources they needed. The tattoo that had once been a source of shame and judgment had become a badge of credibility among the veterans she served. They trusted her in ways that other staff members sometimes struggled to achieve, and Sarah understood that this trust was built on the visible evidence of her own sacrifice and loss. One particularly challenging case involved a veteran named Jennifer who had been struggling with PTSD and had been denied benefits multiple times due to bureaucratic complications. Jennifer was suspicious of most authority figures and had walked out of several previous appointments with other organizations. When Jennifer arrived for her appointment with Sarah, she was visibly agitated and defensive. She sat across from Sarah's desk with her arms crossed, clearly prepared for another disappointing experience with someone who wouldn't understand her situation. "I don't know why I'm here," Jennifer said bluntly. "Nobody ever listens and nothing ever changes. This is probably just another waste of time." Sarah had dealt with similar attitudes before and knew that building trust would take patience and authenticity. She began by asking about Jennifer's service record and listening carefully to her story without interrupting or making judgments. As they talked, Sarah noticed Jennifer's eyes drift to the tattoo on her forearm. Unlike some clients who asked about it directly, Jennifer seemed to be studying it quietly, trying to decipher its meaning without drawing attention to her curiosity. After about 20 minutes of conversation, Jennifer finally addressed what she had been observing. "That tattoo," she said, nodding toward Sarah's arm.
"Someone close to you served?"
Sarah nodded. "My brother. He was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago." Jennifer's entire demeanor shifted. The defensive wall she had built came down, and for the first time since entering the office, she seemed to relax slightly. "I lost 2 guys from my unit," Jennifer said quietly. "Best friends I ever had. That's why I can't. That's why it's so hard to talk about what happened over there." For the next hour, Jennifer opened up in ways that previous counselors and advocates had never been able to achieve. She shared details about her service, her trauma, and her struggles with civilian life that she had kept buried for months. Sarah listened with genuine empathy, understanding that Jennifer's trust was a precious gift that had to be earned. By the end of their session, they had made more progress on Jennifer's benefit claims than all of her previous appointments combined. Jennifer scheduled a follow-up meeting and actually seemed hopeful for the first time in months. "Thank you," Jennifer said as she prepared to leave, "for understanding, for not judging, for having skin in the game." Sarah knew that having skin in the game referred to more than just her professional commitment to helping veterans. It meant having personal stakes in the community, having experienced loss and sacrifice firsthand, and being willing to carry that experience visibly as a testament to what it meant. Word continued to spread about Sarah's effectiveness, and she began receiving referrals from other organizations and even from active duty military personnel who had heard about her work. Her reputation was built not just on her professional skills, but on the authentic connection she had with the military community. However, this growing reputation also brought new challenges. Sarah was invited to speak at a regional conference about veteran services, and she knew that her tattoo would be visible to a much larger and more diverse audience than her usual clients. The conference included representatives from government agencies, traditional nonprofit organizations, and corporate sponsors, who might not be as understanding or accepting of her appearance as the veterans she typically worked with. Mrs. Campbell, her supervisor, addressed this concern during a pre-conference meeting. "I know you might be thinking about covering your tattoo for the presentation," she said, "but I want you to know that you shouldn't feel pressured to hide who you are. Your authenticity is part of what makes you so effective." Sarah appreciated the support, but she also understood the practical realities of the situation. The conference could lead to important partnerships and funding opportunities for their organization, and she didn't want her appearance to potentially jeopardize those possibilities. After much consideration, Sarah decided to wear a long-sleeved blazer that would keep her tattoo covered during the formal presentation but could be removed during smaller group discussions where she felt more comfortable being completely authentic. The presentation went well, and Sarah received positive feedback on her insights about veteran services and the importance of cultural competency in helping military families. During the networking breaks, she found herself in conversations with people who were genuinely interested in learning more about effective approaches to veteran advocacy. One conversation, however, reminded Sarah of the ongoing challenges she faced in professional settings. A representative from a large corporate foundation approached her during lunch and made what seemed like a complimentary comment that actually revealed his biases. "You're so articulate and professional," he said. "You're not what I expected when I heard about your work with these veterans. You could probably work anywhere you wanted." Sarah understood the subtext of his comment. He was surprised that someone who worked effectively with veterans could also present herself professionally to his standards. His assumption was that there was somehow a conflict between understanding military culture and being capable of engaging with corporate or government representatives. "I work here because this is where I can make the biggest difference," Sarah replied diplomatically. "The veterans we serve deserve advocates who understand their experiences and can speak their language." The man nodded, but Sarah could tell that he still didn't fully grasp the significance of cultural competency in veteran services. His comment reinforced her understanding that many people in positions of power still held outdated assumptions about military families and the people who chose to serve them. Despite these occasional reminders of persistent biases, Sarah left the conference feeling optimistic about the future of her work. She had made valuable connections, learned about new resources for her clients, and represented her organization with pride and professionalism. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that she could navigate different professional environments while remaining true to her values and her commitment to the veteran community. The tattoo that had once seemed like a potential career liability was becoming an integral part of her professional identity and effectiveness. A year after starting her work with veterans, Sarah received an invitation that would test her resolve and confidence in ways she had never anticipated. The annual Veterans Day ceremony at the state capitol was looking for community speakers to address the crowd, and Mrs. Campbell had recommended Sarah based on her growing reputation in the veteran advocacy community. The ceremony would be attended by hundreds of people, including active-duty military personnel, veterans from multiple conflicts, government officials, and members of the general public. It would be broadcast on local television and covered by several news outlets. Sarah would be speaking not just as an advocate, but as a representative of her organization and the broader veteran support community. When Sarah received the official invitation, she felt a mixture of honor and anxiety. This was the kind of opportunity that could elevate her work and bring greater attention to the issues affecting veterans. It was also the kind of high-profile event where her tattoo would be scrutinized by people who might not understand its significance. As she prepared for the ceremony, Sarah faced the same dilemma she had encountered at previous professional events, but on a much larger scale. Should she cover her tattoo to avoid potential controversy? Or should she remain authentic to who she was and what she represented? This time, however, Sarah's decision was influenced by a conversation she had with Marcus, the young veteran who had been one of her first clients. He had made tremendous progress in his transition to civilian life and had become something of a success story for the organization. "You know what made the difference for me?" Marcus said during one of their follow-up meetings. "It wasn't just that you knew how to fill out the forms or navigate the bureaucracy. It was that I could tell you understood what service meant. That tattoo told me everything I needed to know about whether you were someone I could trust." Marcus went on to explain that many veterans felt disconnected from civilian advocates who, despite their good intentions, couldn't truly understand the military experience. Sarah's visible commitment to honoring her brother's service had been the bridge that allowed him to open up and accept help. "If you had hidden that tattoo," Marcus said, "I probably would have walked out of that first meeting just like I did with everyone else." This conversation helped Sarah realize that covering her tattoo at the Veterans Day ceremony would be a betrayal not just of her own authenticity, but of the trust that veterans had placed in her. She decided to speak at the ceremony with her tattoo visible, regardless of potential criticism. The ceremony was held on a crisp November morning, with hundreds of people gathered on the Capitol steps. Sarah sat on the platform with other speakers, including a retired general, a state legislator, and a Medal of Honor recipient. She was the only civilian speaker and one of the youngest people on the program. As she waited for her turn to speak, Sarah could feel people in the audience looking at her. Some stares were curious, others seemed judgmental, and a few appeared openly critical. She had worn a sleeveless dress that made her tattoo clearly visible, and she could tell that it was drawing attention from both the audience and other speakers on the platform. When Sarah was introduced, she approached the podium with confidence she had developed through months of speaking to veteran groups and advocacy organizations. Her speech focused on the importance of supporting military families and creating communities where veterans felt understood and valued. "Service doesn't end when someone takes off the uniform," Sarah said into the microphone. "The commitment to protecting and serving our country continues through the families who support our service members and the communities that welcome them home." As she spoke, Sarah noticed that the initial murmurs and distractions in the audience had quieted. People were listening intently to her words, and she could see veterans in the crowd nodding in agreement with her message. "We honor our fallen heroes not just with monuments and ceremonies," Sarah continued, "but with our ongoing commitment to caring for the veterans who continue to live among us. Every veteran deserves to come home to a community that understands their sacrifice and supports their success." When Sarah finished her speech, the applause was genuine and sustained. She had connected with the audience through her words and her obvious passion for the subject, and the tattoo that had initially drawn skeptical stares now seemed to add credibility to her message. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by several people who wanted to thank her for her speech and learn more about her work. Most of the interactions were positive, but one conversation reminded her that not everyone was ready to look beyond appearances. An older veteran approached her with what initially seemed like appreciation, but quickly turned into criticism. "You gave a nice speech," he said, But I have to say I was distracted by that tattoo. In my day, military families showed respect in different ways. Sarah felt the familiar sting of judgment, but this time it was particularly painful because it came from someone whose opinion should have mattered to her. She had dedicated her life to serving veterans, and yet this veteran was focusing on her appearance rather than her commitment. Before Sarah could respond, another voice joined the conversation. A woman in her 60s, wearing a Gold Star mother pin that identified her as someone who had lost a child in military service, stepped forward. "I think that young lady's tattoo shows exactly the kind of respect and commitment we should be celebrating," the woman said firmly. "She's carrying her family's service with her everywhere she goes, and she's using that connection to help other veterans. That seems pretty respectful to me." The older veteran looked somewhat chastened by this response, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the Gold Star mother who had defended her choice. It was a reminder that even within the military community, there were different perspectives on how respect and honor should be expressed. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had successfully delivered an important message to a large audience, made valuable connections with other advocates and veterans, and demonstrated that authenticity and professionalism could coexist. The ceremony had been covered by local news outlets, and Sarah knew that video of her speech would be available online for anyone to see. Her tattoo would be visible to an even broader audience, potentially opening her up to criticism from people she would never meet. But Sarah also knew that veterans across the region would see the coverage and understand that there was an advocate who truly understood their experiences. The tattoo that had once been a source of shame and judgment was becoming a symbol of authentic commitment to veteran services. The Veterans Day ceremony marked a turning point in Sarah's career and her relationship with her own visibility as a military family member. She had proven to herself that she could represent her values and her community with dignity and effectiveness, regardless of how others chose to judge her appearance. Following the Veterans Day ceremony, Sarah's profile in the veteran advocacy community continued to grow. She received invitations to speak at military bases, university programs, and policy conferences. Her combination of professional expertise and personal connection to military service made her a sought-after voice on issues affecting veteran families. However, with increased visibility came intensified scrutiny. A video of her Veterans Day speech had been shared widely on social media, and while most responses were positive, there were also harsh comments from people who focused exclusively on her tattoo rather than her message. One particularly difficult morning, Sarah arrived at work to find that Mrs. Campbell wanted to meet with her privately. The serious tone of the request made Sarah wonder if the online criticism had somehow affected her position at the organization. "I've been getting some calls," Mrs. Campbell said once they were seated in her office. "Some people who saw the Veterans Day coverage have been questioning whether your appearance reflects the professional image they expect from veteran service organizations." Sarah felt her heart sink. Despite all of her success and the positive feedback from the veterans she served, it seemed that superficial judgments were still threatening her career. "I want you to know," Mrs. Campbell continued, "that these calls don't represent the views of our board or our organization. We stand behind you completely. But I thought you should be aware that this conversation is happening in some circles." Sarah appreciated Mrs. Campbell's honesty and support, but the knowledge that people were actively criticizing her appearance to her employer was deeply troubling. She had hoped that her professional accomplishments would eventually outweigh superficial judgments, but it seemed that some people would never be able to see past their preconceptions. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "I want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing," Mrs. Campbell replied firmly. "The veterans we serve trust you, respect you, and achieve better outcomes when working with you. That's what matters to this organization." This conversation prompted Sarah to have a deeper discussion with her family about the ongoing challenges she faced. During dinner that weekend, she shared her frustrations with her parents and asked for their honest assessment of the situation. "Maybe I was naive to think that people would eventually focus on my work instead of my appearance," Sarah said. "Maybe Mom was right about the tattoo being a mistake." Her father set down his fork and looked directly at her. "Sarah, your brother would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. You've honored his memory in the most meaningful way possible. And you've helped dozens of veterans in the process. Don't let a few narrow-minded people make you question your choices. Her mother, who had initially been the most opposed to the tattoo, surprised Sarah with her response. "I've watched you grow into this work over the past year," she said. "I've seen how passionate you are and how much good you're doing. I may not have understood your decision at first, but I can see now that the tattoo is part of what makes you effective in this role." This family support meant everything to Sarah, especially coming from her mother who had been so concerned about the potential negative consequences of getting the tattoo. It helped her recognize that the criticism from strangers, while painful, didn't reflect the opinions of the people who knew her best or the veterans who benefited from her work. A few weeks later, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would change her perspective on the impact of her visibility. The caller identified himself as Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, and he was reaching out on behalf of a military family who had heard about Sarah's work. "Ms. Martinez," Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez said, "I have a soldier in my unit whose sister is struggling with some challenges related to her veteran status. She specifically asked to speak with you because she saw your Veterans Day speech and felt like you would understand her situation." The soldier's sister, Maria, had served 2 tours overseas and was having difficulty accessing mental health services through the VA system. More importantly, she was struggling with the transition to civilian life and felt disconnected from her family and community. When Maria came in for her appointment, Sarah immediately recognized something familiar in her demeanor. She carried herself with military bearing but seemed guarded and isolated, much like many of the veterans Sarah had worked with over the past year. "Your tattoo," Maria said during their first meeting. "It means you've lost someone in service," Sarah nodded. "My brother. 3 years ago." "Mine too," Maria said quietly. "My squad leader. He was like a big brother to all of us. That's why I requested to work with you specifically. I figured you'd understand why this transition is so hard." Over the course of several sessions, Maria opened up about her experiences overseas, her struggles with survivor's guilt, and her difficulty relating to civilians who couldn't understand what she had been through. Sarah's tattoo served as a constant reminder that they shared common ground, even though their losses had been different. "It helps to talk to someone who gets it," Maria explained during one of their meetings. "When people see your tattoo, they know you have skin in the game. You're not just doing this job because it pays the bills." Maria's progress was remarkable. Within a few months, she had successfully accessed the mental health services she needed, reconnected with her family, and even began volunteering with other veteran organizations. Before she completed her sessions with Sarah, she made a request that surprised and moved her advocate. "I want to get a tattoo too," Maria said, "something to honor my squad leader and remind me that his sacrifice meant something. Would you help me design it?" Sarah was honored by the request, and they spent several sessions working together to create a meaningful design that reflected Maria's service and her commitment to carrying forward her squad leader's memory. The process of designing the tattoo became part of Maria's healing journey, giving her a way to transform her grief into something positive and permanent. When Maria's tattoo was completed, she sent Sarah a photo along with a heartfelt message. "Thank you for showing me that carrying our losses doesn't have to be a source of shame," Maria wrote. "Your courage to be visible about your brother's service gave me permission to honor my own experiences." This interaction helped Sarah understand that her visibility was having impacts she had never considered. By refusing to hide her tattoo or downplay its significance, she was giving other military family members and veterans permission to be open about their own experiences and losses. The criticism from strangers continued, and Sarah knew it probably always would. Some people would never be able to see past their assumptions about tattoos and professional appearance, but the positive impact she was having on individual, veterans and military families far outweighed the negative judgments from people who didn't understand her work or her community. Sarah began to see her tattoo not just as a personal memorial, but as a form of advocacy itself. By making her connection to military service visible, she was challenging stereotypes about who could be a professional advocate and what authentic commitment looked like in the veteran services field. 2 years after starting her work with veterans, Sarah had become a recognized expert in military family advocacy. She had been promoted to senior advocate at her organization and was frequently invited to consult on policy issues affecting veteran services. Her reputation had grown far beyond her local community, and she was beginning to speak at national conferences and military installations across the country. Despite her professional success, Sarah still encountered situations where her tattoo became a source of controversy. One particularly challenging incident occurred during a consultation visit to a military base, where she was invited to speak to service members about available resources for their families. The base commander, Colonel Patricia Williams, had specifically requested Sarah's participation in a family readiness event because of her expertise in helping military families navigate civilian support systems. However, when Sarah arrived at the base, it became clear that not everyone was comfortable with her presence. During the preliminary meeting with base staff, Sarah noticed several officers exchanging glances and whispering among themselves when they saw her tattoo. One major approached Colonel Williams privately and had what appeared to be an intense conversation, with occasional glances in Sarah's direction. After the meeting, Colonel Williams asked to speak with Sarah privately. "I need to address something that's come up," she said diplomatically. "Some of my staff have expressed concerns about the message that might be sent by having a civilian with visible tattoos. Speaking to our service members about professional development and family resources, Sarah felt the familiar disappointment and frustration that came with being judged on appearance rather than credentials. However, she had learned to address these situations with professionalism and confidence rather than defensiveness." "Colonel Williams," Sarah said calmly, "I understand that military culture values certain standards of appearance. However, my tattoo represents my family's service and sacrifice. It's actually helped me connect with military families in ways that might not be possible otherwise." Colonel Williams nodded thoughtfully. "I've reviewed your credentials and the feedback from other installations where you've spoken. The reports are consistently excellent. I'm going to proceed with the event as planned, but I wanted you to be aware of the concerns that were raised." The family readiness event went exceptionally well. Sarah spoke to an audience of nearly 200 service members and their spouses about resources available during deployments and transitions. During the question and answer session, several attendees asked specifically about her background and what had led her to work in veteran advocacy. When Sarah shared the story behind her tattoo, the audience's response was immediate and positive. Service members and spouses who had initially seemed skeptical began asking more detailed questions about her brother's service and her organization's programs. The tattoo that had initially caused concern among base leadership became a powerful tool for connecting with the families Sarah was there to serve. After the presentation, a young sergeant approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "My husband deployed last month," she said. "I've been struggling with how to explain his absence to our kids. Hearing about your brother and seeing how you've honored his service gives me hope that we can get through this deployment and that his sacrifice means something." Colonel Williams, who had observed the entire event, approached Sarah afterward with a different perspective than she had expressed earlier. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I let the concerns of a few staff members override my own judgment about your qualifications. What I witnessed today was exactly what our families needed to hear." This experience reinforced Sarah's understanding that her most vocal critics were often people who hadn't taken the time to understand her work or her community. The service members and families who were supposed to be protected from her inappropriate appearance were actually the ones who connected most strongly with her message and her authenticity. Word of Sarah's successful presentations at military installations began to spread. Through official channels, she received a formal letter of commendation from the base commander, and requests for her services began coming from installations across the country. Her calendar filled with speaking engagements, consultation visits, and training sessions for military family support staff. However, the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. Sarah received a phone call from the office of a U.S. Senator who served on the Veterans Affairs Committee. The senator had heard about Sarah's work and wanted to invite her to testify at a hearing about improving services for military families. Ms. Martinez, the senator's aide, explained, "Your combination of professional expertise and personal experience makes you an ideal witness for this hearing. We believe your testimony could have a real impact on policy decisions affecting thousands of military families." The invitation to testify before Congress was both an incredible honor and a daunting challenge. Sarah would be speaking to senators, representing not just her own organization but the broader community of military families and veterans. Her testimony would be broadcast nationally and become part of the official congressional record. As Sarah prepared for the hearing, she faced the same questions about her appearance that had followed her throughout her career. Congressional hearings were formal, traditional settings where appearance and protocol mattered significantly. She would be sitting at a witness table facing senators and cameras, with her tattoo visible to a national audience. Sarah's family gathered for dinner the week before her trip to Washington, and the conversation inevitably turned to the significance of this opportunity and the potential challenges she might face. "Are you nervous about the hearing?" her mother asked. "I'm nervous about doing a good job and representing military families effectively," Sarah replied. "I'm not nervous about my tattoo anymore. If senators want to judge me based on my appearance instead of my expertise, that says more about them than it does about me." Her father smiled proudly. "Your brother would be amazed to know that his little sister was testifying before Congress about military families. He always said you were the strongest person he knew." As Sarah boarded the plane to Washington, she carried with her 3 years of experience advocating for veterans, dozens of success stories from families she had helped, and the confidence that came from knowing her work made a real difference in people's lives. The tattoo that had once made her feel self-conscious and defensive had become an integral part of her professional identity. It represented not just her personal loss, but her commitment to transforming that loss into something meaningful for other military families. Sarah was no longer the uncertain young woman who had hidden her tattoo in job interviews or covered it with long sleeves at professional events. She had become a recognized advocate whose authenticity and expertise were valued by the very community she had committed to serve. The congressional hearing would be the ultimate test of whether the broader political establishment was ready to accept advocates who looked different from traditional expectations but brought genuine understanding and effectiveness to their work. The congressional hearing room was more intimidating than Sarah had expected. Tall windows lined the walls, ornate chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and rows of seats filled with reporters, advocates, and observers faced the elevated panel where senators would hear testimony. Sarah sat at the witness table, reviewing her prepared remarks one final time before the hearing began. As committee members filed into the room, Sarah noticed the mixture of curiosity and assessment in their expressions. Some senators nodded politely in her direction, while others seemed to be taking note of her appearance. Her tattoo was clearly visible in the short-sleeved blazer she had chosen to wear, and she could tell that it was drawing attention from both the committee and the audience. Senator Margaret Walsh, the committee chairwoman, called the hearing to order and introduced the panel of witnesses. When she reached Sarah's introduction, she emphasized both her professional credentials and her personal connection to military service. Ms. Sarah Martinez serves as senior advocate at the Veterans Family Support Network and has been recognized nationally for her innovative approaches to military family services. Ms. Martinez brings both professional expertise and personal understanding to this work, having lost her brother, Marine Corporal David Martinez, in service to our country. As Sarah was sworn in along with the other witnesses, she felt a profound sense of responsibility. She was representing not just her own organization, but every military family who had struggled with transitions, every veteran who had felt misunderstood by civilian society, and every advocate who had been judged on appearance rather than effectiveness. Her testimony focused on the gaps in current military family support systems and specific policy recommendations for improvement. Sarah spoke with confidence and clarity, drawing on 3 years of direct experience with hundreds of military families to illustrate her points with concrete examples and data. "Senators," Sarah said during her opening statement, "the families we serve don't need more programs that look good on paper, but fail to address their real challenges. They need advocates who understand military culture, who have experienced the sacrifices that service entails, and who are committed to long-term solutions rather than short-term political gains." During the question and answer portion of the hearing, Senator Robert Hayes, a veteran himself, asked Sarah about her background and what had motivated her to pursue advocacy work. "Ms. Martinez," he said, "your organization speaks very highly of your effectiveness with military families. What do you think makes you particularly successful in this role?" Sarah took a deep breath before answering, knowing that her response would address not just the question being asked, but the assumptions that had followed her throughout her career. "Senator Hayes," she replied, "I believe my effectiveness comes from authenticity. Military families can tell immediately whether someone truly understands their experiences or is simply going through the motions of helping them. My tattoo represents my family's service and sacrifice, and it serves as a visible reminder that I have personal stakes in the success of every veteran I work with." Senator Hayes nodded approvingly. "As a veteran myself, I can appreciate the importance of that authentic connection. Sometimes the most effective advocates are those who have been personally touched by military service." However, not all of the questioning was supportive. Senator Linda Morrison, known for her traditional views on professional standards, challenged Sarah on whether personal experiences were sufficient qualifications for policy recommendations. "Ms. Martinez," Senator Morrison said with a slightly critical tone, "while I'm sure your personal experiences have been meaningful, do you believe that emotional connections are adequate substitutes for formal training in policy development and government relations?" Sarah had anticipated this type of question and was prepared with a response that addressed both her credentials and her authentic connection to the community she served. "Senator Morrison," Sarah replied calmly, "I have a master's degree in public administration and 3 years of direct experience implementing federal programs at the community level. However, what makes my recommendations effective is not just my formal education, but my ability to understand how policies actually impact real families. Too often, well-intentioned programs fail because they're designed by people who don't understand the day-to-day realities of military life." As Sarah continued her response, she noticed something happening in the hearing room that she had never experienced before. The audience, which included many veterans and military family members, was listening intently to every word. Several people were nodding in agreement, and she could see expressions of recognition and appreciation on faces throughout the room. But the most significant moment came when Sarah noticed a man in military dress uniform standing at the back of the hearing room. He was older, with numerous ribbons and insignia that indicated high rank and extensive service. As Sarah spoke about the importance of honoring military sacrifice through effective advocacy, she saw this officer move from the back of the room toward the witness area. When Sarah finished her testimony and the hearing was called to recess, the officer approached her table. The room fell quiet as people noticed his movement, and Sarah realized that everyone was watching this interaction. The officer stopped directly in front of Sarah and came to attention. His posture was perfect, his expression solemn, and his eyes focused directly on her tattoo. Without saying a word, he raised his right hand in a slow, deliberate salute. The entire hearing room fell silent as this senior military officer saluted a civilian advocate in recognition of her family's service and her commitment to military families. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she understood the significance of this gesture. "Thank you," the officer said quietly, still holding his salute, "for honoring your brother's service and for honoring all of us through your work." The room erupted in applause as other veterans and military family members rose to their feet. Sarah realized that this moment represented everything she had hoped to achieve when she first decided to get her tattoo. She had been judged, criticized, and questioned by people who couldn't see past their assumptions about appearance and professionalism. But in this moment, in front of senators and cameras and a national audience, a senior military officer was publicly recognizing the value of her authentic commitment to military families. Senator Hayes, who had been watching this exchange with obvious emotion, called the hearing back to order. "I think we've just witnessed something that perfectly illustrates the point Ms. Martinez has been making," he said. "Authentic commitment to serving our military families comes in many forms, and we should be grateful for advocates who bring both personal understanding and professional expertise to this critical work." As Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave the hearing room, she was approached by dozens of people who wanted to thank her for her testimony and her service to military families. Veterans, family members, and even some of the senators expressed appreciation for her work and her willingness to be a visible advocate for the military community. The young woman, who had once hidden her tattoo out of shame and fear, had become a nationally recognized advocate whose authenticity and effectiveness were celebrated at the highest levels of government. The memorial to her brother that she carried on her skin had become a symbol of the authentic commitment that military families deserved from the people who claimed to serve them. Sarah's testimony was covered extensively in the media, and the image of the military officer saluting her became a powerful symbol of respect for authentic military advocacy. The tattoo that had once been a source of judgment and criticism had become a badge of honor that represented everything Sarah had achieved in transforming her personal loss into meaningful service to others.